Great, welcome everybody. Welcome to the peak of inflated expectations. You feel it, right? You feel it? And I don't mean that in a bad way, right? But what happens after the peak of inflated expectations? The trough of disillusionment. How many feel like you're already in it? Trough of disillusionment, right? Now, what about the trough of disillusionment? Trough of disillusionment is just where the work starts. I mean, and it may be frustrating, or you may have, failed experiments or whatever, but it's really the time that we start working on stuff. And if I had to summarize what I've seen this year so far, is a lot of energy, clearly, about ChatGPT, but lots of experimentation. And you've all been doing it, lots of pilots and experimentation, but surprisingly little actually movement into scaled production. And that's what's going to happen next. And some of you are already doing it, right? We're kind of all at different places. So in building these trends that I'm about to show you here, the team and I went through and figured, okay, what are the things that are going to help you most? Right? So some years, the top strategic technology trends are like way out there, kind of, half of them are things you've never thought of. That's not true this year on purpose. Because what I wanted to do, knowing that you're headed into a time of implementation, is to give you 10 things that you can do that have been trending, but are super useful. Okay? All right. But we're going to start in 1848. Sometimes innovation takes a very long time. And so imagine yourself southwest of Vienna. And there's a mountain pass called the Semmering Pass, and beginning in 1848, they started to build a railway through the pass. Amazing architectural effort, engineering effort, boring through tunnels and mountains and crazy curves and elevations and all that kind of thing. Took them 6 years, and I imagine this conversation somewhere towards the end of the 6th year. This is beautiful, but none of our locomotives are powerful enough to actually use it. Which was true. That's probably not what happened. What actually happened is they ran a competition for new locomotives that could actually handle the grades and the turns and that were powerful enough to do it. And so they spent 6 years building for something, not entirely sure that anybody was going to be able to use it. And sometimes what we do is we have to have that vision and stick to it. But this next 27 minutes is a message to you as builders. Okay? You may not be building things as complex as this, or maybe even more complex, but these things don't come from nowhere. All right. So vision is what I want you to be thinking about. The future is always under construction. Right? So the future seems like far away or unreachable, but the materials for the future always exist around us. And it's really a question of discovery, of some kind of a catalyst that will bring those things together. So think about some things that have happened over time. So leading to total experience, which was one of our trends from a couple of years ago. So you had a movement up towards that of immersive experience and multi-experience. And finally get to total experience, which is engaging employees, customers at that interface and so on. Okay, so there's a build-up to it. Similar thing with Gen AI. So you have human augmentation, so the use of information to help people, combined with AI engineering, like machine learning, and adaptive AI, so actually some decision-making and automation, and then generative AI. We're going to talk more about Gen AI, surprise, okay, but just thinking, doesn't come. I was looking back in our research, the first time we wrote about generative AI at Gartner was August of 2017. August of 2017. And I know there are those of you out there that's saying, I've been doing AI for a really long time. It's not as new as people think it is, but we'll talk more about that. Okay, when it comes to cloud, one of the trends this year is industry cloud platforms, but it comes from experiences in distributed cloud and cloud-native platforms and things like that. So they don't come from nowhere, and it takes time for them to evolve. So what I want you to be thinking here is, okay, of the stuff I'm about to talk to you about, what's going to be most important for you to reach the vision, the goals that you have? All right. Everything is trending everywhere all at once. So you can imagine, so analysts at Gartner are kind of an opinionated bunch, if you haven't experienced that. So we put out a call to kind of crowdsource trends that we should focus on, and we got, so I have what, 2,700 analysts? We've probably got 3,000 responses from them of trends that we could cover. And you see quite a range of things here, but given the framing that I gave you before, which is let's find things that are going to be trending and useful for you, we distilled it down to 10 trends here. And the way that we've organized them here is into 3 different neighborhoods or themes. So protecting the investment that you've already made. So the things that you've been investing in, like machine learning, like natural language, those things that you've actually been doing for some time, building a corpus of data. We also see the rise of the builders. There's a ramp up in software engineering right now where people are building more things because they have to and the tools are getting better. But then, of course, part of climbing out of the trough of disillusionment is when you start to actually deliver value from those things that you've done. So think about it in these 3 neighborhoods here. There are 10 trends on this slide. I have 24 minutes left. So hang on. We've designed the conference to dig deeper into every one of them because every one of these trends could be a half-hour session on its own. So don't be frustrated if I'm very, very surface on this thing. I'm doing it to introduce them to you, and you can go forth and learn from there. Okay, so let's start with the protecting your investment, rise of the builders, and then delivering value. Okay, so starting with the first one, protecting your investment. Number 1, so AI as partner. So this picks up directly from the keynote, AI as partner, and specifically around protection of what you're doing in AI, because AI creates a very different attack surface, and generative AI adds another variant of that attack surface in ways that you're experiencing. So AI TRiSM, or Trust, Risk, and Security Management, is the first of these trends on purpose to kind of get us thinking about how do we keep our things safe. Okay, now, I put this word on here because it would just be wrong not to have it right in the beginning of the presentation. If you're like me, your life has been hijacked by this term since at least December, maybe even earlier of last year. And you've experienced this, I know. You go into a meeting, it's about something completely different. And it becomes a discussion about ChatGPT. Doesn't matter. It all kind of drifts towards this way. Imagine, one of the ways that I seek what we should cover in Gartner is what are people searching on Gartner.com for? What do you think the number 1 trend typically is on a Gartner.com search? What is the most searched for term? Somebody guess. Over here. Magic Quadrant. I heard it. Somebody said it. Always. Magic Quadrant until January of 2023. Then this word appears at 4 times the volume. And the interesting thing about it is that it's every role that we serve, like not just the CIO role, but CFOs, heads of HR, risk management, supply chain. The demand was across every role at the same level, and it hasn't dissipated. So the pressure for you to deliver based on this interest, because what this did is it raised the level of all things AI and has raised the intent to invest. And so the pressure is on you in the enterprise to actually make this stuff work. Okay, so that's where this comes from. Lots of pressure. Things are moving quickly. You're doing pilots. One of the things that's probably happened in your organization is you see there's an increased intent to invest. This figure comes from a webinar that we did in the first quarter, and we said, because of ChatGPT, how does that change your investment? 45% increased, okay? The reality of this here goes back before, though. 48% of you in 2022 had already deployed AI technology, and you were already using models, right? In 2021, 100 or more AI models. But in the pilots that you've been doing, you're starting to notice what the security and privacy issues might be. Things that are beyond hallucination, right? More into things like, where would I want this to make a decision that had some kind of a physical impact or an impact on a person? So a principle here might be, I'm not going to let this AI, this algorithm, make a determination about a loan for an underserved community. Like that might just be one of your principles, because the data that's in the foundation of the training models would tend to steer a loan away from that population, just because of the bias that's in the data itself. So the tools and the techniques around AI TRiSM are meant to improve transparency, but also to wrap control and explainability. The control piece, just for a second here, you've already have AI governance policies in place. And so what I encourage you to say is, what do we need to extend off of that because of what's materially different from generative AI. You don't have to reinvent the whole thing. I talk with a lot of governments and policymakers. It's the same kind of thing. Figure out what the delta is, and then figure out how do you protect that. Because bias is a very real thing and a very impactful thing. Okay, so AI TRiSM, the kind of tooling that you'll find in here are things like ML ops. I'm seeing an emerging class in the market called LLM ops, so design time protection. But there are also things that protect from model drift or weaknesses in the models themselves. Generative adversarial networks come into play here to interrogate output from the prompts. A whole set of really interesting and emerging techs there. Okay, 2, related. And this is the idea of, well, how do I protect the investment that I have, given that things are moving so fast? And this is beyond AI. AI has kind of been the sharp edge of this stick. But this is also things like geopolitical threats, which are increase all the time, other types of threat actors, and so on. So we talk about this as continuous threat exposure management. So really quickly, it's really, it is a mix of tools, but it's not just that. It's a discussion with your business partners to find out what's the business attack surface, and what assets are connected to that, and what's the priority of protecting those things, knowing that when you had that discussion 3 months ago, it might be different today. And so the way that we've kind of mapped this out here is kind of in 5 steps. So you scope the problem. What's the surface of business attack, the business attack surface? What's the the IT assets that support that business surface? And then you do prioritization. So of those things, what are the things we absolutely need to make sure? So this relates to the outcome-driven metrics work that some of my team has been working on. Then you validate. Is it actually something that could be attacked? What's the likelihood of that? Do we already have things in place and so on? So you're getting sort of much more strategic view, and then you figure out how to mobilize against it. So in a nutshell, this is continuous threat exposure management. It's a set of disciplines, but again, it's using the output from tools. The other thing in here, of course, is the use of AI to protect the organization as well as to find the patterns that are the threat. Right? So it's kind of coming together, protecting the investments that you've made. All right. And when you do this, we've discovered that you're 3 times less likely to suffer from a breach because you have a very agile approach to protection. All right, number 3, protect the future. And this starts around a sustainability conversation. And I don't mean the old words of green IT here. This is another very durable trend and demand signal that we have at Gartner. And depending on the organization that you're in, it may go to the board level, just in terms of fiduciary responsibility for protecting the environment. It's really, really top of mind. The other thing, though, here is that this is really an interaction between sort of engineering technology that are doing sort of power regulation or power measurement, wind farm regulation, those types of things that are maybe more IoT-based or engineering-based and so on, where your connection to this is mostly through the data. Like, what are the patterns you can find in the data? The interesting thing is that you might be able to do even more sophisticated things by taking something you do. Let's say you run a payment system in a bank. There's actually data in the payment system, if you're working at global scale, that could be used to help governments make better decisions. Right? So it's sort of finding the places in that ecosystem where you're approaching sustainability as a team. All right, so what we're discovering is that, and this is telling us this, that you're finding that it actually increases digital maturity because you're having to think in a data-driven digital way across the assets that you have. So you're telling us that. 86% consider that it helps resilience. And so this would be perhaps physical operations in different parts of the world, being able to predict what might happen and what might need to move. Supply chain has a big role here too. And within 2 years, we predict that 75% of CIOs will be responsible for tech solutions, including having it tied to their compensation. Is anybody in that spot now where actually part of your compensation is tied to making better sustainability solutions? A handful. We think it's going to increase, and it may be in ways that you don't think. So my procurement people that helps them make better vendor choices based on the ESG promises of those vendors. Like, even something like that is something that will make a difference. And it is not just E, S, and G, or it's not just E, I should say. And there's more time than I have to go into this, but I'm getting questions about the environmental footprint of large language models and the compute of the foundation models. And that is not a trivial thing. And that's why it's so expensive. right? It's handing the compute costs downstream. But there are social things that we don't hear much about, like the tag farms of people that were used to actually do the tagging to create the foundation models, usually in the developing world. And so there's the scale that this thing launched at has had some ramifications that we're starting to really think through right now. And more on that. Kristen Moyer has a session on that topic that you should go see. Okay, so now we have the platform. We've been protecting it and solidifying it. The word platform is important here. I think of platform a platform is something that makes hard things easier to do. Like in its simplest form, that's really what it is. And it can include people and functionality and so on. And that's really what this section is about. It's about giving some love to the developers. And also people that build things that aren't developers, right? That sit across the lines of business. And this, again, not a new story, but what we're saying is that this, because of the democratization of the technology around us, let me back up a second. One thing I've noticed about ChatGPT is that when I go into a board meeting, almost every board member has played with it. That did not happen with blockchain. Or metaverse, those things, right? My mom, who's 86, uses it for genealogy research and didn't have to think about it at all. She's like in Bing and just whatever. But it's fundamentally changed, right? So you have people that have a desire to interact with information like this and actually build systems that rely on it. So that's really what this neighborhood of trends is about. So number 4, developer-driven self-service. So this is the use of platform engineering to actually expose stuff that should be common. Right? You don't want people reinventing things all the time, right? This is a common, we talk about this every year, really. But the techniques to do this, of course, continue to improve and so on. So it's about building functionality in standard ways so that you can combine what is disparate across the organization and actually combine it into something that's managed as a product. And you're working with actual product teams on the business side to deliver capabilities they need. But there's also, you're providing development services within this so that people that are line of business developers can use it, people that are inside can use it, and so on. The complaints you sometimes hear about this, well, this takes away my creativity, right? Some of you know that I'm a musician, and I play the piano, and thank God, when I sit down to the piano, it has the same number of keys, they're in the same place, the pedals are where my feet want to go, and I don't have to rebuild the piano every time I want to play something, right? So it allows me to be immediately creative. So if you encapsulate security things, privacy stuff, all the stuff that is really hard to do, some of us are old enough to remember when we had to control disk I/O in our code. Thank God we don't have to do that anymore, right? It's all taken care of. Right, so this is something that really enhances developer experience because it reduces the cognitive load and reduces complexity and makes them more productive. We're studying this really carefully right now, this whole idea of Gen AI for developer productivity. Some of the numbers you hear there are really high, like 40, 50, 60% productivity gains. And to be fair, there are great productivity gains, but we're watching to see what's real. The other thing that we're watching, and I think Hung La Hong has a session on this here, is the use of tools that fit into the next trend as being helpful for legacy modernization. Okay, so to enable the platform engineering, there's a team aspect to this I don't want to forget. It's like people that think in terms of products and platforms and evolution of these things. If you're hiring people like out of the tech industry, they come sometimes with that kind of product knowledge, which is really essential to making this stuff work. Types of value that you can get from it is reusability, which is always overpromised, by the way. I know, right? But it's the standardization of stuff that everybody just needs to use and doesn't need to be made different, can be composed in different ways, and is highly configurable. Okay. And to do that, you need what you've already been pursuing, which is a move away from project management to product management as a culture. Okay. I'm at 11 minutes. I'm at number 5. All right. This is a really interesting spot that I'm just going to touch on just a little bit. AI-Augmented development. So the whole Codex, GitHub stuff, and there are multiple platforms to get you more productive in development, is a fascinating space, right? And this is where we see those, the gains in design and development test for sure. Part of me thinks that this might be, the end of having to pound semicolons all the time. Right? It's not going to remove the coder. I think that's a really important thing. And some of you I know are thinking, do I need as many developers to do the work that I have? It just shifts the work to other things. Right? If you can make their their time to value faster, then they get to do more creative architectural things, innovation things, and so on. So again, it's a displacement of that. But it's a great way to retain talent. One of the best ways to retain talent is teach somebody something fast and then make them apply it right away. Like 1 week, bursted learning, new language of some kind. The thing about these tools is that you can actually use them to teach a new language. I'm seeing some really interesting examples of converting COBOL into Python right now. You see some, like within the COBOL stack, getting from 6 to 3, but I'm also seeing actual conversion into other more modern languages, which is fantastic, but not like the panacea, right? It doesn't, at this point, doesn't know enough about code semantics to actually refactor the code. It translates it, but very, very quickly you're going to have a sense of semantics. The thing I'm really curious about and watching is, can it understand architectures? So it could actually create for you solution architectures the same way that IKEA uses it to produce chair designs. Right? The thing about the IKEA example, though, is the chair designs are often things that a human could never sit in. A lot of them have only 3 legs, for example, because probably most of the photos that were fed into the foundation model, the 4th leg was obscured. And none of them had people sitting in them, so no human could sit in these chairs. They're teeny. Same thing with code, same things. Anyways, a few interesting things that are happening there. The other thing about generative AI and AI within the dev lifecycle is that you can use it at multiple stages, like in project planning and spotting connections between requirements, or even documenting code for you, generating code, test augmentation we talked about, scenarios and so on, eventually architecture scenarios too, like what's the best architecture solution to this problem that I have? Okay, 6. Tailor the tailor's work. So again, this is in the spirit of creating common things for people to use so they don't have to reinvent them, the rise of industry cloud platforms, and the fact that they encapsulate stuff that's really specific to an industry, like maybe HIPAA stuff or PCI stuff, or regulations as they evolve, other regulations, or just data models or data fabrics that are sort of nicely tuned to the industry that you're working in. And so this becomes then a very handy way, again, of getting productivity, and it makes this jump from thinking about recreating the technology all the time to getting to a much more direct business value, so shortening that time frame. The types of value that we see our clients gaining from this are the ones you see here. Sports faster innovation, because you're not having to do the sort of fundamental stuff all the time. Reduces redundancy, because everybody's using the same services there at scale. And so if you are tackling industry-based innovation, this is a spot to watch over the next couple of years. One of the things we see happening, of course, is the introduction of Gen AI capabilities into the industry cloud platforms to handle the kinds of use cases that are emerging for specific industries. So we're watching this. You should watch it too. All right. What we see out there, 270 ICPs, industry cloud platforms now, about 24 industry groups. All right. The other thing about the ICPs, of course, is that it doesn't displace your current infrastructure, it simply extends it. And so there's thinking about where the interface is between the ICP capabilities and your own capabilities, and that interface will move over time. So just be aware that it's not meant to replace. Okay, the third neighborhood, looking forward, delivering value. Number 7. Optimizing decision-making, because what's happening is AI is starting to be built into the applications that you buy. And this has been true for a while. So for financial planning and analysis tools, for example, have machine learning in them to do better forecasting based on business drivers within the technologies themselves. What's going to happen is that there will be more of the big enterprise apps that will come, like Salesforce with Einstein, that will come with their own LLM. The caution I'll throw there right now from this stage is they're all going to want you to use their Gen AI workbench platform to do all of your Gen AI. That's a very bad idea, okay? Because what's going to happen is, 2 years from now, we're sitting in this room, it'll be a multimodal, multi-model environment that you're integrating across functionalities, across open source models and all different types of models, and locking into, a very enterprise-specific vendor to do that has never been a good idea. So just a caution there. I've got the teams working on sort of figuring out the best of that. So what about intelligent apps? So there's intelligence being embedded into them. And it's really meant to adapt to the user to give them a better digital experience. What's going to happen in this space, though, and there was an example of it that we used in the keynote this morning, which was related to the finance and planning, sort of, tell me what the business drivers of this last year were, where you're actually expressing an outcome, and the system figures out how to create the prompt to generate that output. And so it's going to get a bit more hidden in, which will be really useful if you have HCM. Like if you have actually HCR data that you want to understand, it would be great to simply ask the system to provide you that output. Same thing with the financial systems and so on. So we're seeing this, again, platforming the prompting to make it easier to do hard things. All right, number 8, 4 minutes and 50 seconds. I'm counting. I'm going to get you out of here on time, I promise. What's amazing about this trend is that I didn't put it first. It took me to trend 8 to get to this. And we've talked about some of it already, and you're going to hear a lot more about it. Just know that I'm very practical about this, just from a research leadership perspective. I'm really excited about the capabilities of this. I use it, in my own life beyond just text. I use it in music, I use it in other art and that kind of thing as a way of generating interesting ideas. But what's happening with the space is that, of course, it's being used to generate things in multiple modalities. This is where I'm finding, as I talk to clients, that the real value sits. So in the challenge that Mary and Don gave you this morning about the game-changing AI, not as much of that is going to come from text as it's going to come from other types of data. Blueprints, molecules, the stuff that's sort of core to what you do. We talk about Bloomberg a fair amount. What they did is they created a symbolic representation of financial language. I have a client that's using it to create computable contracts in the insurance business. And so think about beyond just sort of, let me just say it this way, because I've got to go faster. If all this is a fancy search, then it's not interesting. If all that these large language models and the apps that sit on top of them are just a fancy search, then we haven't really moved the ball very much. There are great uses for that, but I want you to think beyond it. Okay. AI simply is infused everywhere. One of the numbers, and I apologize in advance to John Lovelock if I get this wrong, because I just saw it. We project that by 2030, every dollar of IT spend will have an AI component. By 2030, every dollar of IT spend will have an AI component. All right. The types of things, of course, you're going to gain as value from using Gen AI you see here. So productivity is the least of these. It's really important, but there are other things too, like improving the actual business itself. This is where it gets hard because there aren't a lot of great examples yet. If you have them, share them with each other, the examples. All right. Constantly balancing this risk and reward. Again, the reason many of you probably have hesitated a bit on your pilots is because you haven't quite gotten comfortable with the risk side of this yet. And it could be hallucination, it could be bias, it could be all of those things that we've talked about, leakage of IP, places you don't feel you have control. So you're kind of taking the foot off the gas a little bit. That's okay, right? Trough is where the work begins. All right, I'm going to go a little faster here. Number 9, almost done. So using this then, all of the things we've talked about to empower workforce. Now, the easiest way to think about this, think about all of the stuff that I've talked about and imagine that you are a technician on an airport tarmac, fixing a complicated problem that you've never seen before. So where do you get knowledge? You get knowledge from schematics, you get knowledge from standard operating procedures, you get knowledge from other people that have seen and fixed this problem. You get knowledge from the device itself through IoT and sensors and data coming into that environment. Imagine that digital experience for that employee if you can help them solve a problem they've never seen before using generative AI to query the systems and bring stuff back, or to use mixed reality to actually bring them immersively into that experience and to use it and so on. So that's kind of where I see this going next, is in the service of people that have that kind of a job. Right. And it is, again, the real-time use of data, like you see here, knowledge bases, endpoints, everywhere you can capture data. And the data piece of this, too, what we're finding is that knowledge graphs work more effectively to pull the data back into the prompt. So begin experimenting with that. There's sessions on that here, too. OK. It will improve things like service level, response times, output quality, but really importantly, what it improves is their own experience. Because the fastest way to lose somebody is to give them a crappy digital experience. People will quit. All right, number 10, I might go a minute over, I'm sorry. Machine customers, and Don and Mark are doing a signing on this. There are sessions, I encourage you to go see it. But the idea here is that you will begin to have to serve these machine customers that don't have emotions. Like they just want the best price negotiated and they want reliability in the supply chain. But eventually they will have ethics or ethos or way they make decisions based on only work with providers that have this level of ESG promise and have fulfilled it, like those kinds of things. So interacting with machines will eventually have some kind of a shaping or an ethical component to it. And as you're thinking about game-changing AI, think about those places where you can use your own machine clients. Okay, so those are the trends. Those are all 10 of them. I know I went through them fast. I deliberately spent more time on the front of this because they're meaty. But what I'd encourage you to do is to say, you know, what do you want to address that applies these trends to it? And think about building something that has yet to be used, because that's where the power of where you sit is. Let's get to work. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your show.